recording?
Yes.
Alright, ready? Why do we need coral reefs?
How much time do we have?
The sea has always been a place of mystery to mankind. It is the foundation of the entire planet. As Lucius Seneca once said, "Thus is nature. Beyond all things is the ocean, but beyond the ocean there is nothing."
So coral reefs have multiple layers of importance for human civilization and society. We can start with sort of maybe the most non-scientific level, which is aesthetic levels. Coral reefs are just extraordinarily beautiful places with colorful, high biodiversity assemblages of just amazing and endlessly interesting species. Biologically, I would say coral reef ecosystems provide critical resources and services to the marine ecosystem.
Coral reefs are really important because they provide a lot of oxygen for us in the atmosphere. They also soak up a lot of the carbon dioxide that we produce through just people, through cars, through manufacturing. And if we didn't have it, if we didn't have the reefs out there, we wouldn't really have very healthy oceans and we wouldn't have a very healthy land.
Every other breath you take came from a coral reef. Though they make up just under 1% of global ecosystems, they have the power to change the atmosphere. With global temperature expected to increase 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, coral reefs are not prepared to adapt to such a quick global change. An estimated 30% of coral reefs will have died off in the next 10 years, and more than 90% will be gone by 2050.
I'll go out and we'll go out to shallow reefs and we'll see lots of areas where the coral is in transition from being healthy to sick, and it gets bleached out white, and you can tell because it stands out compared to the rest of the coral. And then a lot of the algae grows over it and it becomes this sort of like mossy colored stuff, which is not its natural state. And I mean, Hawaii doesn't have the same kind of like brightly colored corals as maybe like in the Great Barrier Reef, but the corals have a very different color when they're alive. They're these sort of like vibrant, like sort of dark purples and browns, which are really pretty. And it's just hard to see that because they could be so much healthier if we weren't affecting them the way that we are. And it's hard when we're in a position where sometimes it feels like it's happening so quickly, where we go out diving so often, and over the course of maybe 6 months we can see more corals that have been bleached and are now dead, and that's tough. Kind of sucks.
Areas where coral reefs are gone or damaged severely, we see entire marine regional ecosystems collapse completely.
How are the coral reefs of Hawaii? From the surface it is hard to tell, and harder still to see how human activity affects them.
Well, here in the Hawaiian Islands, we don't have the super well-developed coral reefs that a lot of coastal ecosystems have closer to continents. However, the economic engine of the state of Hawaii is tourism, and whether we like that or not, most tourists come to the Hawaiian Islands for water recreation and at the very least, taking a dip in the clear, warm water. Without the coral reefs, our ecosystem, our coastal ecosystems would just be drastically degraded. And this would have direct impacts on tourists and visitor, basically, enjoyment of the experience of coming here. Again, all those things I talked about before, which have to do with sort of the ecosystem services provided by one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, would be lost from the islands. And the islands really have no connection to other islands because we're so far away, we're so isolated, nor do we have connections, obviously, to continental land masses. So if all of our coral species, were to poof, disappear, it might be thousands or hundreds of thousands of years before coral larvae could recolonize the islands through long-distance dispersal and just the lucky circumstance of landing on these specks in the middle of this massive Pacific basin.
But everything we do has an impact on the world around us.
One of the largest factors is our CO2 emissions. So the actual CO2 is what is degrading the coral skeletons that the polyps live inside of. And they're made out of calcium, and the calcium carbonate isn't able to form when there's an excess amount of CO2 that's being absorbed by those corals. And when they can't produce their shells, they don't have a way of protecting themselves, so they either die or they don't even grow to their full potential to be able to, reproduce and create more. So I think the CO2 emissions and the absorption of CO2 into the ocean is the biggest factor affecting the corals right now.
Global climate change, which is the main threat to coral reefs today. There are other threats, things like dynamite fishing, actual tourists just walking around on coral reefs in heavily trafficked coastal areas, as well as coral harvest for construction. So reef rock in many countries is harvested and used as building materials. These are all major threats, but I think any marine scientist would agree that global climate change is going to be our coming challenge for the next century or so.
Coral reefs have not only been a subject of science, but hold great significance in Hawaiian culture.
Well, the connection with the Hawaiian people and coral reefs, considering that they're voyagers, so they had a basic understanding of the ocean. And with that, they had developed their culture around the ocean as well as the land. And in their creation chant, the Kumulipo, which could be compared to the book of Genesis in the Bible, they start with how the earth, the land, the light, and the dark were first introduced into the world. But the first living organism in the community was the coral polyp. And it kind of speaks to the basic understanding of how Hawaiians understood how ecosystems started, and they were aware of that kind of sort of things hundreds of years ago. So it kind of spoke to the intelligence that they developed throughout the few hundreds of years that they inhabited the islands.
There is still hope for Hawaiian reefs. Even in uncertain conditions, some coral has the strength to thrive. Scientists and conservation groups are working on rehabilitating and regrowing coral reefs. This may be their key into surviving into the future.
I think one reason a lot of people don't know that it's even happening and they don't know how to help it is because they're not in the water, to be honest. They're not out in the ocean. They're not, even if you're just snorkeling, you can see what's going on out there. And just having a general awareness, educating yourself, learning about what's healthy and what's not. A big thing is, surprisingly, is you've probably seen it, is the Reef Safe sunscreen. They call it that for a reason because there's chemicals like oxybenzone that are in the non-safe ones that come off of your skin, and they are a big detriment to the corals, and they really don't help them at all. They slowly start to kill them, actually. And little things like that, and if you're swimming out and you're near corals, just watch where your feet are, being aware of your body, trying not to knock into them because they take a long time to grow, and knocking them can break off pieces that would have taken maybe 100 years to grow. So educating yourself and making sure you're protecting yourself with the right kind of sunscreen that's not going to come off and get into those coral polyps. And just really, being aware of what's going on can really make a difference. Just, it might not feel like it, but it really does make a big difference when everyone learns just a little bit more about what they can do to help out.
The more outreach we can do to try to educate, the public as to the importance of our tropical coral reef ecosystems, the more support we'll get, through the federal government as well as state and local governments for making this a priority to start really focusing on mitigation and figuring out what we're going to do as the global surface temperature continues to rise.
I think that it's going to be really challenging because it's gotten really far and so many of them are already dead. By a lot of estimates, pretty much half of them at least are already dead. But a lot of groups are already working on, or have been working on, keeping things alive, like with Sylvia Earle and her Mission Blue, the Ruth Gates Lab here in Hawaii on the Hawaii Institute for Marine Biology. There's Australian groups that are working on coral conservation. The research is out there, it's being done, and people have been providing protection for a lot of these corals, and they've been doing it for a while because they've already known that this is happening. So I think that with our advances in technology in terms of maybe adapting corals to these new environments that they're not used to, providing better environments for them to flourish in, I think it can be saved because there's people that really care, and we're all working really hard to ensure the future of the reef.
Yes, I do believe we can save coral reefs if we make a large enough difference as a community.
Reefs are vital and precious to the natural world. They are the most fragile and powerful ecosystem on the planet. We must not forget as humans that we still belong to a system dependent upon them. The ocean is always changing. It will adapt as the rest of the planet changes. Whether or not humans change with it will determine the fate of our species.
In one word, what do coral reefs mean to you?
Life.